I'm Tracy Ormsby, publisher of the Adirondack Explorer, and I just want to thank all of you for coming. I'm so pleased to see this wonderful turnout for Bill McKibben, who has put us at the front of his list for his book tour this year. So we're really, really grateful for that and glad to have him with us tonight. I just want to thank a few people. First, the Wild Center for hosting this evening for us. Thank you so much. And I want to also thank the Adirondack Council, which has sponsored all of our events this year, and we really appreciate them and the work that they do here in the Adirondacks. So, Rocky Aguirre, the executive director, is here tonight, and he's going to say a quick welcome and make some more introductions.
Good evening, everybody. This is one of my favorite rooms to kind of stand up and do this stuff in across the Adirondacks. So appreciate Tracy and the Explorer and making this happen. I'm Raul Aguirre. Many of you know me as Rocky Aguirre. I'm the executive director for the Adirondack Council. This year, the council is celebrating our 50th anniversary of working to protect clean air, clean water, working lands, and to sustain vibrant communities across the park. And I apologize for my voice. It's the end of August, so for those of you that are in the know, it's the end of a long season. So, and I just, when I was asked to come and present a few remarks, it was really to just say, you know, as we gather tonight, this is a really important conversation. It's clear now that the role of the advocate is more necessary than ever. As new threats surface and as we watch hard-won victories start to unravel, it's clear that safeguarding this park, our protected spaces, and just our natural environment at large is going to be more critical than ever. It's going to take the combined strength of everybody in this room, a combined commitment to make that protection happen, not just here regionally at a state level and nationally. So what I have taken away, and I've got the same slide right here in front of me, and what I appreciate most about Bill's book, and these Sunday events in general, is that they do speak to and spark hope, right? And do inspire action, foster advocacy. And I just want to say thank you, Bill, for your ongoing commitment to the Adirondacks and for your advocating for solar and wind and fostering advocacy and tackling the very real issue of climate change. And, you know, we are honored as the council to help sponsor these events and this critical discussion. I do want to thank Stephanie and Jen and the Wild Center for making this space available. And then, obviously, Tracy, Carol, Tom, and the entire Explorer team for bringing us all together here tonight. So those are my welcomes. I'm also been asked to do an initial hello and welcome to Jenna to kick this off, which is really where the fun stuff happens. So if you'll allow me, Jenna Aldlin is an author, naturalist, and chicken parent. I've said that to myself a number of times as I've sort of gone through these. I love that. So thank you. With deep roots in Texas, Colorado, and the Adirondacks, they run a YouTube channel called the Explore More Challenge, which focuses on nature as well as environmental and climate topics. And bear with me here because there's a list here about the climate summits. Jenna has helped plan and present at a number of youth climate summits, including the Wild Center's Adirondack Youth Climate Summit, Central New York Climate Summit, Boston Youth Climate Summit, and the Youth Environmental and Sustainability Summit at the Ashokan Center in Olive Bridge, New York, which is close to where I grew up. And I will just say, they gave a great TEDx talk, and it's worth tracking that down on YouTube to know more about Jenna. They are a rising first-year student at Hampshire College, and if you'll please help me welcome Jenna Aldlin to.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I want to start off by saying, you know that moment as a kid when you're introduced to someone and, you know, a grown-up tells you, like, this person's a big deal, they're, like, super cool, and their work is, you know, legendary, and you're like, okay, cool. And then later on, you're like, oh my gosh, I met that person, you know? A few years back, I was first introduced to Bill at the Vic out in Paul Smith's, And like, I knew he was a climate leader. I knew you were cool. But it wasn't until doing more research that I found out how insanely cool this man right here is. So Bill McKibben is an internationally renowned environmentalist, author, and activist. He is a founder of 350.org, the first global grassroots climate movement, and has been a leading voice in climate advocacy for over 3 decades. One of his many works, Here Comes the Sun, explores the transformative power of solar energy and the hope it offers for a cleaner and more equitable future. Through his writing, organizing, and incredible advocacy work, Bill has inspired people across the globe to take action. It is an honor to have him here today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Bill McKibben.
Well, Jenna, thank you very kindly for that introduction. And what a pleasure to be here. I feel mildly guilty having pulled you all inside on what's got to be just about the most glorious day of the entire summer. I had the great fun of driving up from our house in Warren County today, and it was gorgeous the entire way. And then we hit that new pavement outside of Long Lake, and it was like, I mean, I know as an environmentalist I shouldn't be like, but I'm an American too, and it was really fun. And then, you know, I've been coming to Tupper Lake for 40-some years, a few times a year, and I got to say, we had dinner tonight at the brewing company out there with the food trucks and music going on. It's like, yeah, the vision that people had when they put together the Wild Center of what Tupper Lake might someday turn into is really what's happening, and it's really nice to see. So Betsy and everybody else, just huge thanks for making it all happen. So I think, Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm supposed to talk for a little while, and then we're going to talk together for a little while, and then we're going to do some questions. I'll try to keep from rattling on too long. I'll start with the bad stuff and get it out of the way quickly. This is as difficult a moment on our planet and in our country as I can ever remember. Things are going extremely badly on our planet right now. We've got a couple of great climate scientists. I see Rich Wolfson and I see Kurt Steger here tonight, so they feel free to correct me if they think I'm overstating things. But the stuff that I started warning about in the 1980s in the end of nature is now just what's happening in the world. It's happening faster and hitting harder than we would have thought 40 years ago, but it's pretty much right on tap. The temperatures we're now seeing on this planet are the hottest that they've been in at least 125,000 years. That warmth, that warm atmosphere, and the thing we notice most at this, on the surface of the planet, I think, is the fact that that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. That means that we get more evaporation in dry areas, and often that's dramatic, like what happened in Los Angeles in January. I will just say in passing, we've told ourselves for a long time in the Adirondacks that we live in the asbestos forest and it's never going to burn and things like that. I don't think that's true. I think the dry spell that we've had the last few weeks and the smoke drifting down from the completely in the huge inferno in the boreal forest of the northern Canada, which was never supposed to burn either, should be good reminders to keep an eye on things. Anyway, once that water's up in the atmosphere, it comes down, and it comes down increasingly in deluge and downpour. And of course, we've seen plenty of evidence of that here in the last few years. Those things are accelerating and getting worse. You can tell they're getting worse because, if nothing else, the insurance industry, who are the people we ask to deal with risk in this world, are unable to any longer really cope with figuring out what on earth is going on. But the thing that worries me is that it feels also as if we're starting to affect some of the most deep systemic forces on the planet. The jet stream draws its power from the temperature differential between the equator and the poles. Now that we've melted much of the ice in the Arctic, the jet stream is weird, wavering, stuck in high amplitude patterns and giving us long spells of drought or flood, depending on which side we're on. The Gulf Stream, the Atlantic currents, which together are the volume about 100 times larger than the Amazon River, and are absolutely crucial for the transport of heat around the globe, are beginning to flicker and falter in real time. So we're in a very difficult place, and it's made far worse right now here by the advent of a new administration in this country that not only doesn't believe in climate change and is doing everything it can to slow down action, but also, I think, doesn't really believe in democracy either, and is making it harder and harder and harder to kind of stand up and do anything about it. So there is no shortage of big, bad things happening on planet Earth. What I want to talk to you about tonight is the one big, good thing simultaneously happening, and my hope that it might be a way to leverage ourselves past at least a little of the trauma that we're in. So, solar cell. I'm just learning to talk about this. This is the first talk I've given since this book was published last week, so you're sort of the guinea pigs. The solar cell was invented in 1954 in New Jersey at Bell Labs. Those of you who are old enough to have been using payphones in the 1950s were funding the development of the first solar cell. Okay, and it's always been a thing of great promise, but that promise couldn't be realized until we reached the point which we reached about 4 years ago, when we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to generate energy with sun and wind than by burning coal and gas and oil. That's an epochal moment for human civilization. It means that if we want to, we could move very quickly to end the human habit that dates back at least 700,000 years of setting stuff on fire. A habit that served us well for a long time. We learned to cook. That gave us the big brain. We could move north and south from the equator. Nobody was living in Tupper Lake before someone figured out fire. And then when we learned to control the combustion of coal and gas and oil, we called that the Industrial Revolution, and it produced modernity. So good, except now the costs are starting to outweigh the benefits. The climate is the most obvious of those, but not the only. 9 million people a year die on this planet from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. That's about 1 death in 5. If you go to India at the moment, you won't have any trouble believing that. There are 5 million children in New Delhi. At least 2.5 million of them have irreversible lung damage just from breathing. So it's quite remarkable to imagine that we could start very quickly to move away from that. And we have enough places around the world that have demonstrated that over the last 36 months to give us a real sense of hope. California might be the most obvious. Californians have taken this seriously for a decade or more and done the work to build a pretty robust infrastructure of renewable energy. It passed its tipping point sometime in the last 18 months. Now, almost every day in California, they generate more than 100% of the power they use for long stretches of the day from renewable energy. That means that at night, when the sun goes down, the biggest source of supply on the grid are batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. None of those batteries were on that grid 3 years ago. The bottom line is that California, fourth largest economy in the world, is using 40% less natural gas to produce electricity than they were 2 years ago. In the 40 years that I've been working on this problem, that's the single most optimistic statistic I think I've heard. It's not confined to California. The state that's actually putting up clean energy the fastest in America is Texas. which is remarkable since it's also the headquarters of the hydrocarbon industry, but the economics have just been so powerful there that they've been kind of unstoppable. And nothing that's happening in this country even comes close to what's happening in the rest of the world, especially China, which has been the leader here. The Chinese, the numbers are almost beyond comprehension. In May, the Chinese were putting up 3 gigawatts of solar power a day. A gigawatt is the rough equivalent of a coal-fired power plant. So they were building the equivalent of a coal-fired power plant out of solar panels every 8 hours in China. Okay? Chinese carbon emissions have now peaked and begun to go down. They've dropped 1% or 2% just in the last 6 months, while America's have increased 4.5% over the same period. So it's amazing to watch this start to happen around the world. Amazing and beautiful in so many ways. I'll tell you one more story from right next to China, because it makes me very happy even to think about it. Pakistan is the country that's probably been bludgeoned hardest by climate change over the years. Its cities now routinely report temperatures of 126, 127, 128 for months in the summer. They've had the 2 biggest floods that we know about in the last 15 years, probably the biggest floods on this planet since Noah. But they're lucky to be located right next door to China. And there's a lot of cheap solar panels in China, and the people who 3 years ago were importing rice or cement are now busily importing solar panels because Pakistan's electric grid was expensive and unreliable and people wanted something else. Beginning last about January of 2024, people watching on Google Earth just began to sort of see the spread of solar panels across the rooftops of Lahore and Karachi and Islamabad. Within 8 months, individual Pakistanis, mostly using TikTok videos with Hindustani music in the background, had installed the equivalent of half the country's electric grid inside of 8 months by themselves without sort of government help. Farmers were the first and biggest takers for this technology, because those of you who've traveled in rural Asia know that the soundtrack of that part of the world is the hum of diesel generators pumping the deep tube wells that are the residue of the green revolution of the 1960s, the irrigation water. That diesel is often the biggest input for farmers, and so they were early adopters here, often lacking the money to build the kind of steel supports that we're familiar with, just laying the solar panels on the ground and pointing them at the sun. Pakistan last year used 35% less diesel fuel than it. So these kind of changes give us hope for what we could do. We have to do it fast for it to make any difference. Absent climate change, I guess we could sort of sit back and let economics do its thing. And 30 or 40 years from now, we would run the planet on sun and wind just by virtue of the fact that it's cheaper than anything else. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to do this, the planet that we run on sun and wind will be a broken planet. Not okay to leave Jenna and her cohort with that kind of world, not if we have an option, and we do. And that option is to sprint in this direction, to deploy this stuff with all possible speed. There's places around the world where that's happening, but the United States isn't one of them. And in fact, at the moment, just the opposite. Not very hard to figure out why. If I know that California is using 40% less natural gas, you can be assured that hydrocarbon headquarters in Houston knows it too. And you may recall that this time last year, then candidate Trump told the oil industry, if you give me $1 billion, you can do anything you want. An early example of his new kind of governing philosophy. They gave him about $500 million between donations and advertising and lobbying in the last election cycle, and that was enough. Now the administration is granting every possible favor and doing everything it can to slow down this transition to clean energy. There's not much we can do about Washington for the next 18 months. Go to court, and happily there are lots of people doing that. But what we can do is an extraordinary amount of work at the local level to make real change. Now that this stuff is cheap enough to acquire a kind of head of steam, to figure out how to get out of its way. What do I mean? Well, for example, it costs about a third or a quarter as much to put solar on your roof if you're in Australia or the EU compared to the US. And it takes almost no time. If you're in Sydney, it's Friday. If you'd called up this afternoon, your contractor, and said, I want solar system on my roof, by next Friday it would be up there pumping out energy, okay? That's why 40% of homes in Australia have solar panels on the roof. In this country, that's not how it works. We have 15,000 different municipalities and counties. Each one has their own code. They all have 6 inspectors to send out over and over again to look at stuff, on and on and on. By the time you're done, it's taken months, and it's cost, in many cases, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 more than it needs to. So there are good cures for this. There's a thing that the National Renewable Energy Labs came up with called the Solar App Plus that allows for essentially instantaneous permitting. California, Maryland, and New Jersey have already adopted this. Time for everybody else to do it. It's one of the things that we're pushing hard as we head towards Sunday on September 21st. Not Earth Day, Sun Day. This is the first kind of nationwide celebration of renewable energy. And there's hundreds and hundreds of events scheduled for around the country, including the North Country. It's going to be an extremely powerful day. There'll be e-bike parades, and there'll be solar concerts, and there are also going to be places, I think some of them in New York, where people are out there protesting against new gas pipelines that we don't need because we should be doing this instead. What it really is, and this is the bottom line of this talk and this book and this day, what it really is an effort to get across to people that this is no longer alternative energy. That's the tag that we've been using for 4 decades. That's the folder in our brain where this stuff lives. But it's not true anymore. This is the obvious, common sense, straightforward way to produce energy on our planet. 95% of new generating capacity in the country and in the world last year. The analogy I've been using is that we've been thinking about this stuff as if it's the Whole Foods of energy. Nice, but pricey. It's the Costco of energy. It's cheap, it's available in bulk, it's on the shelf, ready to go. We need to deploy it, and it needs to become the great task of human beings in the next few years, to deploy this as fast as we can. On behalf of people around the world who desperately need cheap energy, if you live in a developing country and your country can't afford the schools and hospitals and things that it needs, one of the biggest reasons for that, the biggest reason for the balance of trade problems that countries around the world have, is they have to keep paying for the next shipment of oil to come in over and over and over again forever. Despite the fact that they have plenty of sunshine and plenty of wind, and if they can get the initial capital to build the modest infrastructure to catch the sun and the wind, then they're sitting pretty, as will all of us. The world will operate in, well, I don't want to be utopian, and I won't be, but I'll just say this. Try to imagine the geopolitics of our planet over the last 70 years if oil had been of trivial value. Think of the number of wars and coups and assassinations and terrorist plot, everything else that we could have avoided. Humans are very good at starting wars, but it will be difficult to figure out how to fight over sunshine, okay? An unbelievable opportunity in a brief moment to take advantage of this offer. I mean, the sun, which already provides us with light and warmth and our food via photosynthesis, is now happy to provide us with all the power we could ever want. We just have to catch it. It's going to require people working together to make that happen. You see the things that people have done with our logo, the half a sun. Half a sun because we're halfway there. We have the technology. We now require the political will to make it work. There are 10,000 of these drawings on the gallery at sunday.earth. That one's from Jane Fonda, who will be there in New York with me on Sunday itself, the last big gathering. It's Well, I will just say, if I sound a little confounded, it's because I've spent the last 40 years bringing people the bad news about this planet. And it is bad news and been right to do it. But at the moment, we have this powerful piece of good news, one that would begin to blunt the climate crisis, and one that would also begin to blunt the grotesque inequality and imbalances of power that also wreck this planet and this country. We can rely on a resource that's available to everyone, everywhere, and that can't be hoarded or held in reserve. That is the greatest chance that humans have had in my lifetime, and I'm devoted to making sure that we seize it. So that's why I'm here today, to try and get you to come around to Sunday when it happens, and to help out in every other way you can think of. I'm going to stop there, Tracy, so we can talk and then we can ask some questions. Thank you. I was thinking this was a can of beer, but it's not.
Would that be better?
No, it's
Well, thank you, Bill. That is, it is very inspiring, but I am going to go back and talk about some of the obstacles that are in our way. I think we can't obviously talk about this issue without talking about politics and, the rhetoric, the windmills that cause cancer. The USDA yesterday announced it's going to eliminate all funding for solar on American farmland. And you talked in your book about counties in Nebraska that are requiring 3-mile setbacks from neighbors for a wind turbine. A bill in Wyoming to outlaw carbon reduction measures, the Make Carbon Dioxide Great Again Act. And in Nebraska, a ban on all renewable energy in the state. So how do you combat this?
Well, okay, so is this working here? Yes, it is. So let's talk about some of the obstacles, and let's begin with these questions around land use, because they're important. And let's don't even bother talking about what they're doing in Nebraska. Let's talk about, say, New York State. And let's talk about the Adirondack Park. The former governor wrote a piece in the Explorer a month or two ago saying, don't use farmland in the Adirondacks for solar arrays. That'd be a bad idea. We need to protect our farmland. Well, let's talk about, first there was a great letter immediately in response to it from a farmer over in Williston Way someplace, saying, if you want farms, you better support solar arrays because it's one of the ways that we're actually going to generate enough income to keep farming. But beyond that, it's such a short-sighted way to think about things. In the first place, our sense of farmland is sentimental in lots of ways. The biggest crop that we grow in this country is corn. We grow 60 million acres of it. 30 million of those acres we use for ethanol. We're growing gasoline, okay? It's unbelievably inefficient. I was in a farm field in Illinois last year with a wonderful guy, a corn farmer who was converting some of his fields to solar arrays. He said, here's an acre of corn. It's now used for ethanol. In the course of a year, it grows enough ethanol that it will drive my Ford F-150 25,000 miles. Okay? Here's this acre right next to it, same land. I've put solar panels on it. In a year, it produces enough electricity to take my Ford F-150 Lightning, the EV version of the same truck, not 25,000 miles, but 700,000 miles, okay? Photosynthesis is a miracle, but it's not a very efficient one, and solar panels are tremendously efficient, not to mention the fact that a cornfield, at least in the monoculture Midwest and in places around here, is a biological desert, sprayed within an inch of its life to keep pests away, and you have to pour nitrogen and phosphorus on it to make it work, all of which launch into Lake Champlain, and now we're supposed to spend billions of dollars cleaning that up. Clean electrons are a crop we need, okay? Really need badly, and we need to stop getting in the way of them. I love the Adirondack Council, and I always have. But I will say, 20 years ago, 25, Sue, down where we live in North Creek, there was the first plan for a big wind farm. It was going to go up at the old abandoned garnet mine. Up above town, there was roads up there and power lines up there. But the council and others intervened to make sure it didn't happen on the grounds that they didn't want to look. People didn't want to look at windmills because there was wilderness nearby, and you shouldn't have to look. I get that. I've spent more time in the Siamese Ponds wilderness than almost anybody I know. I love it there, but I understand that the deepest threat to it is the fact that we're not going to have winter much longer unless we quickly get a hold of this. So we were very eager to put those windmills up, and I hope that they come back someday, and I hope that when they do, people start to think there's something beautiful about the breeze made visible. We need a new aesthetic for the world in which we live. Now, that does not mean we need to put windmills in every wilderness ridge top. We don't. We need a couple of percentage points of the land in this country to produce a truly vital crop, clean energy, that we all use all the time. So New York has an immense amount of work to do. It's fallen behind the rest of the country. There's a lot of push, including by my great friends at Third Act, upstate New York, which on the off chance that there's anybody here who's crossed the age of 60, on that off chance, you should sign up with Third Act, because we started this about 3 years ago to organize older Americans in work on climate and democracy, and they're doing unbelievable work. It's one of the upstate New York chapter is one of the most effective advocacy groups I've ever watched. They've become a big force in Albany in short order, and these are precisely the kind of things they're working on.
I know this might sound NIMBY, Bill, so bear with me. But if we just need a small percentage, and there are special laws protecting this unique, beautiful place where we're sitting right now, is it possible to get where we need to get without the 6 million acres here?
Everybody needs to play some role in doing this. And we really, that's part of what it means to be a responsible member of our civilization at this point, to step up and do some of this work that needs to be done everywhere. The Adirondacks is perfectly capable of supplying its own electric needs with a tiny bit of land, and so there's so few of us, and whatever, that it's, would not be, and at all beyond our ability to do it. And we have an enormous, those of us who live in this part of the world have an enormous carbon debt that we will never pay off. We've been pouring carbon into the atmosphere for 200 years. We drive everywhere we go, and we have for generations, on and on and on. So paying off some small part of that is necessary. I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be a hard ass about all this, but I think that's just, I don't know. Jenna, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it strikes my sense always when I talk about this is that young people understand more intuitively the fact that we're going to have to be making some changes, and I think they're often ready to do it. We've talked a lot about climate anxiety in the last couple of years, and there are a lot of people, young and old, who are feeling a sort of sense of dread and anxiety about what's happening. But my sense always is that it has less to do with actual anxiety about what's going to happen to the climate than, especially for young people, a sense of anxiety that they've been left to deal with it themselves, that having, gotten the cream off the top, the rest of us have decided that it's up to the next generation to deal with these problems, which is one of the reasons we started Third Act. And it's really been wonderful to watch older Americans rise to the occasion and come together around all this.
In one of your, I'm sorry, back to,
Can I talk about, I want to talk about land use for one more minute, because there was one more thing I wanted to say. When I was with that farmer in Illinois and we were looking at his arrays, he said, the other thing I want you to notice is those solar arrays only take up half the field. There's big rows between them, and those rows are valuable. And indeed, they are valuable. If you think about it for a minute, we live on an overheating planet, and on an overheating planet, shade is all of a sudden a really good commodity, a really good thing to have some more of, in part because it helps you retain moisture when you get these dry spells. So we're talking, he was doing, and people around the world are doing what they call agrovoltaics now, a clunky name for figuring out how to creatively farm in and amongst the places where we produce energy. Now, I've already confessed that I'm a beer guy, but I will tell you that I just saw the studies from France. Wine grape yields are up 60% in these fields where they're sharing the vines with solar panels, because they've got some shade and some moisture. In Vermont, we're interplanting many of the solar fields with native pollinating species of wildflowers, weeds, and they're drawing in not a few insects, 100 times more insects than were there when it was a cornfield or even an abandoned scrub field. And so the farmers on all the surrounding fields are finding that their fruit set in their orchards is up 30 and 40%. It's completely interesting to watch human creativity go to work opportunities like this.
and how is the agrivoltaics, what is its potential to address some of this opposition that we talk about to solar, whether it's rural politics, NIMBY?
It's a good question. It helps, and much of the opposition does not, in most cases, doesn't come from farmers. Farmers are actually eager to, very few farmers want to constrain the use of their land. They're eager to have another potential crop, and especially one that offers an extremely stable long-term return, something that food crops don't always. The opposition usually comes from the neighbors surrounding them, often retired people who have moved there and don't want to look at solar panels or windmills. And to some degree, people invent absurd scenarios. They're just going to give us cancer. It's whatever. But what we find in place after place is that if you work it out so that there are serious benefits to the community, then a lot of that disappears. In Texas this spring, the hydrocarbon industry wanted to do the same thing they did in Washington, really get in the way of this renewable energy transformation. So they went to the state legislature with a whole series of bills, the most egregious of which, and everybody expected to pass, they were calling it DEI for natural gas. If you wanted to build 5 megawatts of solar, you also had to build 5 megawatts of natural gas, okay? So they were about to pass this until people from across rural Texas started streaming into Austin saying, guys, this is how we pay for the school in our rural community. This is what's keeping the old folks' home open. Do not do this. And the legislature, I mean, the Texas legislature is not a very progressive institution. At the moment, they're, trying to arrest their Democratic minority to keep so they can redistrict things. But in this case, they walked away from it because there was enough solid support out in the hinterlands. The fossil fuel industry is doing everything it can to kind of gin up opposition with these sort of astroturf grassroots things. But that's one of the reasons we're doing Sunday, to try and kind of spread the opposite message.
Speaking of that, you sent a recent email with the subject line, "Trump is shockingly dumb about electric power." And you said that electric bills will play a large role in the next 2 elections. Energy costs are climbing, and you say Democrats need to be on the offensive about this. What is their soundbite?
Well, so this is I write this free newsletter every week or so about climate stuff, just to kind of highlight, mostly to highlight other people's work that I think is good. But I usually do a little essay at the front, and this one was about and electricity prices are up already about 10% this year across the country. And it's not hard to figure out why. There's, on the one hand, a big increase in demand starting to come from these data centers and things. And on the other hand, the Trump administration has completely restricted our ability to build sun and wind. In the last 3 weeks, they've said you can't build it on federal land. Trump said yesterday you can't build it on farmland. You can't build it offshore. I was writing a piece for the New Yorker today, and the title of the piece was "Green Eggs and Sun." I will not have it on my farmland. I will not have it in my ocean. If you increase demand and constrict supply, you don't have to be an economic genius to figure out that the price is going to go up. We don't seem to have economic geniuses running our affairs at the moment. So it's really important for people to understand this, because they're going to do what they always do. The Secretary of Energy gave a speech yesterday where he said, well, electricity prices are going up and it's Joe Biden's fault. So they will do their best to run this. The 10 states in the union that have the highest penetration of renewable energy are also 10 of the 12 states with the lowest electric rates. These are mostly the big wind states out across the plains, where energy is very, very cheap because they've captured all that wind and put it right to work.
Another issue that's important here in the Adirondacks is the cost of rooftop solar. How can we get more people to invest in this when they have a hard time paying for their own routine maintenance on their homes?
Well, so of course this was the reason that we passed the IRA, was to make it much easier to do this. And if you know anybody who's even considering rooftop solar, get them to do it right now. The tax credits disappear on midnight on New Year's Eve. They were supposed to last a decade, but they're going. And if you have any interest in buying an EV, which you should because they're way better cars than the one you currently drive, do it by the end of September, because that's when the tax credit there disappears. Without those tax credits, we're going to have to make this industry much more efficient. In Australia, there's not really a subsidy or a tax credit, but they've done they've worked it out so efficiently that it costs a quarter what it does here. The biggest first step is reducing the soft costs around permitting. And if we can get that done, we can probably bring the cost down more than to more than compensate for the loss of those subsidies. But that's work that will take a lot of people pushing in order to make happen. It's good work to do. While we can't do anything in Washington, we can do a lot. And it is not confined to blue states or blue cities or anything else. Let me tell you a story about this stuff we call balcony solar. In the last 3 years across Europe, since the invasion of Ukraine, explosion in small-scale solar systems for people who live in apartments. Don't have a roof, but they often have a balcony with a railing. You go to whatever they call Best Buy in Germany, you plunk down 200 or 300 euros, you come home with a solar panel designed to be hung over that railing, and then it just has a cord that sticks into your wall with a plug. Okay, no fancy anything. In many cases, it's enough to supply 25% of the power that a household uses. That's illegal every place in the U.S. except Utah, which 2 months ago passed by unanimous vote of the state legislature, enabling legislation allowing it in Utah. Some libertarian state senator who I've now met and like, he's a doctor, a good guy, stood up and said, why can the people of Hamburg and Stuttgart do this and not the good people of, Provo and Salt Lake City? And so now they can, and if you go on YouTube, you can find already dozens of videos of people happily hanging their balcony solar equipment off their Salt Lake City apartment. We can do that. That's something we can pass in every state in the country if we put our minds to it. It won't solve the problem by any means, but it's a great gateway drug to more solar energy. All the Europeans, there have been story after story about Europeans who they get this thing and they get the app that goes with it, and then they spend, half an hour every day just watching their app and seeing how their son is doing, and things. So this is sort of thing we badly, badly need.
And one question for you, Bill, before I let everybody else have a chance here. There have been a lot of battles won and lost in the climate fight over the years. You've been there for most of them. Here in your third act, what is the one thing that you'd like to happen in the time that you're working on this?
Well, this stuff that I'm talking about tonight is the first thing in those 40 years that's really, the first thing that could scale fast enough to make a difference. Here's how I think about my time doing this. 35 years that I've been working on this, fossil fuel was cheap and renewable energy was more expensive. So that meant that to be an activist trying to deal with climate, your basic job was to try and figure out how to drive up the cost of fossil fuel. That's why people worked so hard on carbon taxes. It's why we did divestment, huge $40 trillion now divestment campaign to raise the cost of capital for the fossil fuel industry. It's why we fought tooth and nail over things like the Keystone Pipeline to make it harder and harder for them to expand. So that was a whole set of tools that we had to use. We had no choice. That's where we were. But now we're in a world where that is flipped. Where it's renewable energy that's cheap and fossil fuel is relatively expensive. And so the job is to figure out, now that we've got this boulder starting to roll down the hill, how to get behind it and push it as hard as it can and hope that it flattens the fossil fuel industry as it rolls over it, And so I'm very excited about that possibility. Now, it is not going to stop global warming. It is way too late for that. Okay. But, Rich, you correct me if you think I'm getting, or Kurt, if I'm getting too far out, but a 40% reduction in natural gas use in the fourth largest economy in the world in 2 years is the kind of number that, applied around the world, begins to shave tenths of a degree off how hot the world eventually gets. And we live in a planet where every tenth of a degree Celsius that we increase moves 100 million of our brothers and sisters out of a comfortable climate zone and into a dangerous one they may very well have to abandon because it gets too hot or their house is underwater or it all just caught on fire or whatever else. So reducing the temperature at which the planet settles by a few tenths of a degree is the most important work that humans could be engaged in. It's truly may be the difference between may allow us to stop climate change short of the place where it cuts civilization off at the knees. And at the same time, the reason that it's, I think, so attractive to me, it does all these other things too. That it moves us out of a world where, when did truly grotesque inequality start developing in our society? John D. Rockefeller was probably the sort of proto-example of this, and it was because he had control of a scarce resource that he could, in essence, hoard and dole out piece by piece, and lots of other people learned the same lesson. Who were the biggest oil and gas barons in our country over the last generation? It was the Koch brothers, who controlled more refining and pipeline capacity than anyone else. And they used their winnings to erode the foundations of our democracy. One of the reasons Donald Trump has found it so easy to kick them over. Who's the biggest oil and gas baron in Europe? It's Vladimir Putin. He used his money to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. It would be really nice to no longer depend on that's only available in a few places and that just naturally gives the people who control them too much power. There's something beautiful about the small d democratic notion that we could produce this commodity everywhere around the world and begin, as again, it's not perfect or utopian, and there'll be solar billionaires and whatever, but begin the process of building down this superstructure, this hierarchy. So, since we're at the Wild Center, let me just finish by saying, at some level, the thing that I think I like most about it is the fact that it connects us with the world around us. The sun is the most charismatic object in the natural universe. There's not a human being who doesn't smile when the sun comes out from behind the cloud and hits them in the shoulder blades, you know? Recall, a year ago, April, when the eclipse came over this part of the world. It was, 2025 is truly bad, but 2024 wasn't great. That was the one day when it seemed to me everybody was in a good mood. I was at the campus of Middlebury College, and there were Sue and I were there, and there were 1,500 kids out on the quad, and they all put down their phones for a good half hour and watched this thing happen. It was fantastic. We have deep connection to the sun. People get depression when they don't get enough sunlight, you know. The fact that we could produce our energy from heaven instead of hell strikes me as a remarkable advance, and one that will be good for our spirits in all kinds of ways.
Does anybody out there have a question for Bill?
Very good questions, by the way, Tracy. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was great. Very enlightening and also emboldening, let's put it that way. There are things that can be done. But I've been around for a long time in this country, and I've been involved in a lot of struggles. And I know that the capitalist ethic in this country is stronger than it has ever been. Everything is transactional. Value is not on how many people get receive benefits, but how much money you make. So everything is commodified. To do the things that you're talking about, if they begin to have some success and people begin to buy into it, they're going to be fiercely opposed by capitalists who are cruel, who are fierce, and who don't want to surrender an ounce of power and energy. Now, you mentioned that the third act, which nominally I'm a member of, but I haven't seen too much information coming from the third act about the advocacy work that they do in Albany. And I did quite a bit of advocacy work to no avail around Medicare for All a few years ago. That's another story in itself. And I'm not too bad at doing lobby work. So to come right down to it, my how shall I put it, cynical introduction was a way of finding out what exactly third act is focusing on in Albany, the advocacy work that they're attempting to get done.
Well, I'm not going to completely attempt to sum up everything they're working on, and Andrew is here someplace, and there's others from Third Act. You can go to the website. But I've done my share to help out with some of the Albany work, and they've done an unbelievable job. The reason that we get a climate superfund bill through in Albany this past year had a lot to do not only with the lobbying, but with the fact that 13 third actors went to jail to pressure the governor to make it happen. And there have been a number of lots of other bills that other legislation that people are working hard on in Albany. So that Third Act Upstate New York group is fantastic. On the larger question of capitalists and so on, I mean, what you describe is obviously what's happening. The fossil fuel industry is reacting to this challenge in the only way that they know how, which is by the application of large sums of money to game the political system. But A, we need to game the political system back. That's what Sunday is about. And B, there are, were we actually a capitalist formation here in this country, this would actually be relatively easy to get done. Any sort of logical free market economic system would choose to have lower priced energy rather than higher priced energy. So we have economic wind at our back, so to speak, now. In a way that we never have before. But that doesn't mean that the fossil fuel industry won't stop, because they're not capitalist in that sense. What they have are huge reserves of fossil fuel worth tens of trillions of dollars at the moment that become valueless if we produce cheap energy. But it's in everybody else's interest, including everybody who runs factories, everybody who runs homes, on and on and on. It's just that we don't perceive it as being as important or central to our lives as the fossil fuel industry perceives it as being important and central to theirs. So they're spending more money and they're fighting harder. We need to rally in order to do that. So Third Act, for instance, spends very direct lobbying on important issues around this stuff in Albany, and then it spends some of its time doing things that are the equally important effort to change the zeitgeist. Activism works best when you are able to change that zeitgeist, and when you do, that sense of what's normal and natural and obvious. And when that happens, then all the legislative stuff gets considerably easier along the way. So, I'm not guaranteeing we're going to win. I don't know. The one thing I will say, though, is that it's going to be extremely hard for the U.S. to figure out how to island itself off while the rest of the world is doing this. At the moment, and let's just be clear about this, we are ceding the future to China. It's not that China is eating our lunch. We have sent a team of red-capped waiters over to China to serve them our lunch, okay? And it's disgusting, absurd. But that's That's how this is going to happen around the world. We think of Detroit as the center of the automotive universe. It's not. There's 3 or 4 cities whose names are hard to pronounce in China that are now more important because they're producing $10,000 good electric vehicles that the entire developing world is going to buy. And, you know, it's possible that 15 years from now, if Trump at all have their way, then, you know, tourists will, who can get a visa, will come visit the U.S. to kind of gawk at how, you know, sort of a colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion, you know, see how people lived in the old days, and you'll go for rides in a Cadillac Escalade or something. I don't know, but hopefully that won't happen. I think at some point, just the sheer fact of having to compete with vast and powerful countries that are getting their energy for half the price of ours will begin to convince people that they better make some changes. Oh, there's a microphone over here. Good.
Hi. My name is Tolga Morawski, and I came up from the Mohawk Valley. And I kind of, the first part, I have a question, but I also wanted to respond to the last questioner. I think the bigger issue that we have in New York State for adoption is really inertia, and especially governmental inertia or a lack of inertia. And also with our utilities. Like I heard on WAMC, the NPR station last week, that the National Grid is applying for a 26% rate hike on their electricity. But meanwhile, I work in affordable housing, and we are doing, we're working on a pilot program with the Attorney General, Tish James, on a conversion of a mobile home park to a net zero home park, all solar, heat pumps, geothermal, and everything. And the biggest piece of resistance we have is the utility company. So I have spent, we put in our paperwork 3 years ago, and we're still waiting for power. Every single week, every single day, every interaction I have with the power company, I have a group of guys sitting at a truck saying, oh, this is never going to work. You can't, you're taking the gas lines out? What's wrong with you? And they slow walk everything.
Yep.
And then we're also working with NYSERDA, which in many ways is great because they fund a lot of the work that we're doing. But unfortunately, sometimes they really can't get a good team of people that's continuous, that's working together. It's like every day it's a different thing changes, a person changes, somebody leaves. So that lack of continuity for my life as somebody that's just focused on building housing, I can't get the work done. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on governmental inertia.
I think inertia is exactly the right word. And all of us who've watched New York State government over the years know that New York State is probably particularly inert in lots of ways. So that's why one organizes, to give a kick in the butt to the politicians who have to be willing to prod this system to move along. You know, when you think about, so let's think about something that happened in New York State this year, finally, that's proven to be an unalloyed, complete, 140% success. That was the congestion pricing thing in Manhattan. It took 20 years for people to get this through. And Governor Hochul almost crushed the whole thing. Delayed it 9 months and almost destroyed it, but there was enough pressure on her that finally she had to give in. And the minute that it was done, suddenly it was obvious to everybody that this was a great idea. I mean, everybody, you know, business is up for, stores in Lower Manhattan. Traffic deaths cut dramatically. Air pollution way, way down. It's not as noisy. Just every possible thing that you could think of. The kind of project you're describing is the perfect example of how, of just what we need. And that's why we need people at places like Third Act and everywhere else, just pushing relentlessly. It should not take, old people going to jail to get some of this stuff to happen. In a rational world, it wouldn't, but sometimes that's what it does take. At least it takes constant pushing to get things done. Right now, we can't push in Washington. There's no point. There's not going to get anything to happen in the short term. So while we're organizing to, elect a different Congress, we also need to be pushing close to home where we can. And New York is an excellent place to do this work. It's the 10th largest economy in the world. What happens here really matters. It's not just that it's the 10th largest economy, it's the biggest pool of capital on planet Earth is in New York. So everything we do here ramifies, counts extra. Because it sort of serves as a model. So that's one of the reasons I'm really glad that we've, organized Third Act, and that other people, environmental advocates and others are organized around the state to try and push hard. And I wish I had a magic answer for you, but there is no magic answer. There's just the hard work every day. But I will say this, it's really been fun to watch Third Act. When we started Third Act 3 years ago, this won't work because old people become more conservative as they age. Okay, that may have been true at one point, but if you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, it means your first act was in that period of intense social, cultural, political transformation, the 60s and 70s. We have muscle memory about this. We have connections, skills acquired over a lifetime, and time. And so some of that has been just, incredibly, it's been brilliant to watch. State after state now, we've organized people to go after, to bird dog the public utility commissions in states. These are crucial bureaucracies that have been protected for decades by a force field of their own boringness, okay? They meet all day Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Who but an industry lobbyist is ever going to go sit there? But now we've got lots of people who will take a basket of knitting or a crossword puzzle book or whatever and sit there, and they will testify, and they will, just by the sheer act of witness and recording this and being, they're beginning to make all kinds of connections and changes. So I felt very vindicated in this strategy of our strategy of mobilizing older people like me yesterday, when Stephen Miller, the odious sidekick to the president, was giving a talk about what was going on in, he said, everything's going great in Washington, D.C. as we, send the military out, to, said, everything's going great. The only problem are these old white hippies everywhere who are, they should go home and take a nap. We're not going home and taking a nap. We're going to keep protesting all we can.
Let's do just one more.
Yeah, Bill, thanks so much. Great job. I've been following you for about 40 years, and for about 60 years or a little bit more, I have spent in the marine industry as a captain of super tankers and ship's officer and so on. So I've been all over the world carrying crude oil, petroleum products, refined, unrefined, and I've millions and millions of barrels of refined and unrefined petroleum products. And I've noticed a change, and you were referring to it tonight, the change when we started using methanol. I watched that. So we started carrying methanol, and then along came the wind turbines from overseas, from China, from Vietnam, from Norway, from Spain, and so on and so on. So now I'm carrying, well, I just retired 2 years ago, but up until a couple of years ago, I was carrying all kinds of wind infrastructure and a little bit of solar infrastructure. And now, since I have retired 2 years ago, talking to some of my colleagues, there's a lot of work going on right now with ships being experimenting with, and it's more than just an experiment. They're doing it with wind power, not 100% wind power, but hybrid. So with that as a background, I really appreciate what you've been talking about tonight, and I'm so glad to hear you. And I just wanted to share what I have observed over the last 6 decades. It's been a big change. It's a big change for me. But maybe I could ask you a question, and that is, in upstate New York, especially in Jefferson County, I live in Jefferson County, right on the shore of Lake Ontario, and there's been a lot of talk recently and some action by National Grid and our legislators and so on about nuclear power, and especially the SMRs, the small modular reactors. Could you comment a little on the SMRs especially? Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. I will do that, and then I'm going to return to your beginning of your question. Look, it's completely possible that sometime in the distant or not so distant future we'll actually have workable, cheap, safe nuclear power. We don't have it now, and right now is the time that we need to be dealing with climate change. What we do have right now are batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines. And that's what we need to deploy now. If 50 years from now or 25, someone has a small modular fusion reactor that we can start pulling solar panels out of the fields and put a few, fine. I'm not going to be around to see it, I don't think, but it's fine. But at the moment, in this emergency, that's what we've got. And truthfully, I think probably this is a better option over the long run anyway. There are a lot of people who who just have an affection for nuclear power. And I try to console them by reminding them that your solar panel is directly connected to the largest nuclear reactor that we know about, just held at a safe distance. But I want to go back to end on the stuff that you were talking about with shipping, because I thought it was so interesting. You know, one of the things that people say sometimes is, well, we're just going to have to do a lot of mining for all this renewable energy and whatever, and isn't it just as bad? It's true that there's no free lunch, but there are definitely more and less expensive lunches. And in material terms, I mean, if you think about it, and it's important to think about it because this is the change that's underway. You have to go mine some lithium to make a battery work, at least for the moment, although the new generation of Chinese cars this year has sodium-ion batteries. And we're not going to run out of salt anytime soon, I don't believe. But if you go mine some lithium, you put it in your battery, and there it works for 25 years doing its thing. When its battery degrades, you can recycle it and get the valuable lithium out and start over again. If you go mine some coal, you set it on fire, and then you have to go mine more coal tomorrow. The Rocky Mountain Institute said last fall that they thought the total mining volume for the energy transition between now and 2050 was probably be less than the amount of coal we mined last year in this world, okay? So, and a way that I try to think about this, and it was brought to mind by what you were saying about your cargoes over the years. Imagine a shipload of solar panels coming from China to America. Over the course of their lifetime, those solar panels will produce roughly 500 times as much energy as that same boatload filled with oil. Okay? That gives you a sense of the degree to which we can dematerialize, in many ways, the world around us. 40% of the ship traffic in the world is just carrying coal and oil and gas back and forth to be burned. And it would be a staggering relief to all the other things that like to live in the ocean if we weren't doing that. And we don't need to, because the sun is perfectly happy to deliver energy for us every day. It rises above the horizon. It's the difference in the worlds that we're talking about. This is a different way of thinking about how the world operates. And thank you very much for your work of bringing us the stuff that we've needed for the last 100 years to make the world operate. Now we need something different to make the world operate, and it's the transition that's hard, because there is a group of people who don't want it to happen, who are invested in what we have now. But if we can do the work to get through that transition fast, then what's on the other side may not be quite as bleak as the world that we've all been imagining for what's to come. There I end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. You've been to the Wild Center many times, and we really appreciate everything you do to keep this movement going, and we really appreciate it. Thank you, Tracy, for organizing. Thank you for the Adirondack Council for supporting, and thank you to all of you to come tonight. This is what we love to do here at the Wild Center. We like to gather, we like to talk, we like to hear inspirational talks like this. So come back, and also come back and see our Climate Solutions exhibition if you haven't already seen it. So thank you for joining. Oh my gosh, it's so great.
This was a good evening.
It was so great.